We're back. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Schatz and Tanier NFL podcast from FTN Fantasy for Thursday, July 10th, 2025. I am Aaron Schatz. You know me as that DVOA guy from FTN Fantasy. He is Mike Tanier, and his Substack is called The Too Deep Zone, and you can find it at miketanier.substack.com. And we are joined today by Dan Pizzuta to start our preview of the 2025 season and the FTN Football Almanac 2025. Dan wrote 3 of the 4 NFC East chapters, and that is the division that we are going to be previewing today. So he is joining us. Now, we do have the book coming out officially on Monday, and you can pre-order it on PDF now. You can't pre-order the physical copy, but you can pre-order the PDF by going to ftnfantasy.com/almanac. But we are also going to give away a PDF copy of the book to somebody who is watching our YouTube stream live this morning. So here's how you win. Comment on the YouTube stream with the team that you think has the highest win projection this year. Which team do you think we're giving the highest win projection to? I'll give you a hint. It's not one of the teams we're covering today. That gives you 28 to choose from if you include Carolina. And put which team you think has the highest win projection, and we will take one of the people who gets that right and give them a free PDF copy of the book. How have you guys made it through the offseason? The Hitchhiker Spy points out that the offseason is dark and full of terrors. Have you made it through? Here we are. We're almost at training camp.
The trick is to work on the book until like June 20th. And then, by then it's like, well, I guess we'll take 2 weeks off for Father's Day and the 4th of July. And now we're here. So what offseason, right, Dan?
Yeah, it is funny. People think that this is people are like, oh, you get to take a break before the training camp. And I'm like, no. I work like crazy before training camp. It's February when I took a break.
That's true. Right.
Yeah, it's always a lot of work in the book that definitely helps to pass the time. It's a lot of work, it's fun work. It definitely passes the time between when everyone else is looking at a dead period.
Right. Yeah. And really for any NFL writer, mini camps go till about June 10th, 11th, 12th, just in time for your kids get out of school. You do some of that stuff and everyone starts ramping up right about now or Monday when the book comes out.
So the NFC East is one of the interesting divisions. I'm going to give a little bit of a surprise here. We end up with the Washington Commanders as our favorite to win this division. In fact, they're favorites in the numbers by more than I would personally have them. Like, I understand, we'll talk a little bit about why we have Philadelphia regressing a little bit, why we have Washington moving forward a little bit. And schedule strength plays a big role here because people probably know the Giants have the hardest projected schedule in the league. Philadelphia's is number 2. Washington's is only 12th because of the teams that finished in second last year compared to the teams that finished in first last year. But we actually end up with Washington winning the division in 52% of the preseason sims, Philadelphia in 32, Dallas in 12, and the Giants in 4. So let's talk about the Eagles first and why we might have them coming back to the pack a little bit. Now, and give Mike a chance to defend his team. I mean, they are projected in the top 10 in all 3 phases of the game, but lower than last year on defense, and that's the big difference.
Lower on defense from, especially in the second half of the season, was an unsustainable run, and I think it's Cal who wrote that chapter in the book, right?
And no, Cale wrote the Giants. Dan,
you wrote
the Eagles, the Commanders, and the Cowboys.
Okay, well, Dan, I don't have a lot of objection to what you said because you talk about how there's like a plexiglass principle in place that's likely to happen to Eagles defense.
Yeah, a little bit, but it also, like Aaron said, the Eagles end up being one of the most well-rounded teams that we have in the book, being I think top 10 in all three phases. They're just not quite as big, especially there was such a big gap between them and the other teams in defense last year. And when you look at what their defense is and how much they lost, I think we do ding them a little bit for so much of the turnover that's happening there. But there still is a fairly high ceiling, I think, if you want to be optimistic about them, because I think, to spoil a little bit of the top 25 prospects in this book, it's filled with Eagles, and we were filling it out. And at one point, there's like, oh, there's probably another Eagle we should add to this. And there's a bunch of guys on defense. So it's a very young team that has that core now, that has been in that system now for over a year. And that's one of the interesting things with Vic Fangio too, is I know Aaron's pointed this out very often. Fangio is not usually a year one type of guy with that big boost like a Wade Phillips usually was. Fangio usually takes about a year or so to really get that boost. So for it to have already happened the back half of year one, I think there is some optimism there. If you want to be optimistic about how this defense could carry over, it just might not be overwhelmingly the best unit in football like it was last year.
They lost the most veteran talent by the variable that I use in the system. Miami is second for losing defensive veteran talent. But I put together for every team today a list of who's in and who's out. Mm-hmm. And the thing about the Eagles is you can talk about who's out, and we know, right? Kellen Moore is gone, the offensive coordinator, Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, Bryce Huff, Mekhi Becton, CJ Gardner-Johnson. You talk about who's in, and you're like, other than the rookies and the new offensive coordinator, who's Kevin Patullo, who was previously the passing game coordinator, you're like, Azeez Ojulari, like they didn't really add. Now, so they're depending a lot on these guys that Dan just mentioned, who in our top 25 prospects list, who haven't seen that much playing time yet, but we think are strong players. The system doesn't know if they're strong players, but we really believe in Jalix Hunt and Keely Ringo and Mojo Oromo. Or am I getting that wrong? Is it Moro Ojomo?
Yes, that one. Yep.
I like the
Moro Ojomo, the defensive tackle. He's the replacement for Milton Williams. And so we're and then Sidney Brown we almost put Sidney Brown on the list. So there is a lot of young defensive talent here that are later round picks, but that we think can really blossom. And if they do, this defense is not necessarily going to drop that much this year.
It's an example of, well, the Eagles sort of have an answer for every departure. But when you start saying, well, there's 7 departures on defense, so we have 7 answers, how many of them are going to answer at that high level? I have no question. I don't think Eagles fans have any question about the idea that the team could drop off. It's now that they're going to drop off to the point that the Commanders are favored over them.
Right.
That's the part that I think is rather shocking.
And I think the other is the offense. People don't realize the offense for the Eagles was something like 10th or 11th in DVOA. During the regular season. They were so good in the playoffs and especially in the Super Bowl that we forget that come around December, people were like, what's wrong with this offense? Why can't Jalen Hurts get the ball to Brown and Smith enough? Now that people are sort of been like decided, a lot of people have decided Jalen Hurts is the number 5 quarterback in the league. They forget what we were saying about this guy in December, which was, there are problems and, not everything is perfect. And so the offense doesn't actually regress. It just, the Super Bowl is the exception.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where all of this kind of plays together, because while that offense, I think, was uneven at times during the regular season, it had a pretty wide margin for error because that defense was so good. It allowed them to still stay in games. That is a lot of the Saquon Barkley impact too. It's not that he was killing it at every run. He still wasn't great in success rate, but that big play seemed almost inevitable. But because the Eagles were still in close games, because that defense was so good, they didn't have to abandon the run at any time. So if that big play didn't hit yet, we could wait till the fourth quarter, and that Barkley run was probably going to happen, and that either broke the game open or was, a meaningful big run at the end of a game. And that happened so often. So if that defense is still, bottom of the top 10, maybe that offense doesn't have quite as much margin for error to be staying in that game and run with some things that might not be working as well during the game.
And I've got to say that as the creator of Curse of 370, I'm not as scared that Barkley's going to drop off as maybe I should be. Some of it is that people keep quoting touches, and historically receptions are not the same as runs when it comes to workload. But he did have a very high workload last year, and there certainly were times in wins where they could have gone to Gainwell. But I feel like he's going to be fine.
Right. Again, there's going to be a drop-off from a 2,000-yard season. But I don't see any cliff. And just to be clear, the number 5 quarterback in the NFL is the friends we made along the way.
Yeah. Someone pointed out when I talked about this on Blue Sky a couple of days ago, there really is no number 5 quarterback in the NFL. It's there's a lot of guys who, depending on the day and what you're looking for, could be right. I think everybody agrees the top 3 is Allen, Mahomes, Jackson in some order. Mm-hmm. And everybody agrees Joe Burrow is 4.
We would hope.
Yeah, and then the number 5, I think, says more about you than it does
Bengals fans are the only people who put Burrow higher.
Right.
And then 5 could be any number of dudes.
Right.
Yeah, it says more about you than the quarterback.
Yes,
I would say.
All right, let's talk about the Commanders, the team that we surprisingly have winning the division, because we don't have them regressing on offense, and we have their defense improving to average. That's, by the way, where I question the system the most, admittedly, is the idea that this defense will improve to average. They were much better on the run, against the run on first down than second or third last year, which tends to carry over more. So that's one thing the system is seeing. And, a full year of Marshawn Lattimore healthy is nice. But you look at the personnel on defense and you're like, golly, where does the pass rush come from unless you blitz Frankie Louvu? And is Trey Amos ready as a second-round pick in his rookie year? And you're like, I don't know if average. I don't know if this defense can really be average.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, that's the question, especially when you do look at what they are doing along the edge. There's really nothing there, so it's going to have to be a lot of manufactured pressure. And there was a lot of fun stuff with Frankie Louvu, and I think they can continue to do that. But when you were kind of looking at, going back and looking at the film, there's a lot of fun stuff. But when you look at like 3rd and longs, when they were really kind of bringing some of that stuff out, it wasn't very effective. So I kind of worry about that too, even though if you kind of like pull up a play and you kind of share, it's like, oh, they're doing some fun things, but they're just something wasn't clicking. I think they're really going to have to hope that the defensive tackles are in the interior of the defensive line is what's going to bring in the pressure. And they sign a guy like Javon Kinlaw, who was 9th in ESPN's pass rush win rate, which is, getting off the line quickly, but that didn't turn into anything. Right. So I think if that secondary is not holding up in the way that they hope it's going to improve, the ball is going to be able to get out quickly. And then that kind of makes everything worse, just kind of by in order of kind of some dominoes falling there. So I think this is a defense where I think everything does have to work to its best of its ability to even, get to that average projection.
Yeah. What didn't click on 3rd and long last year was that somebody was open.
Yeah.
Cornerback.
The secondary was terrible last year.
Secondary was terrible. And
St. Juste is gone, and Forbes was already gone by the end of the year. And
Forbes. Good God. And Lattimore comes in injured, takes a while to get back, then doesn't look like he's himself. You mentioned, Dan, that he said he was tentative. He was playing tentative when he was facing, I guess, Mike Evans or whoever. Now they've got Lattimore healthy. They do. I like Amos, but of course he's a rookie. Jonathan Jones is hanging around too.
Yes, he's there. They signed him. Yep.
Yeah, and Sandstrell's a pretty good nickel. I think he'll grow into it. You're right. I don't see an edge. And Kinlaw's at least theoretically replacing Jonathan Allen, who was hurt most of last year, then came back and didn't seem 1,000,000% with the program. So I don't know if that's necessarily an upgrade.
I mean, they added Dietrich Wise at the edge, which as a Patriots fan, I'd like to say whoop-de-doo.
What about Jones? What about Jones? Speaking of
Jones is fine. Jacob Martin, they added Jacob Martin. So they added some guys that are fine, but nobody on the edge, nobody scares you. Nobody scares you at all. The offense, now what's interesting, because I think people would expect us to say there's going to be regression. And in particular, they were absurdly good. The book talks about, there's a table of how good they were on 4th down. insanely like the greatest fourth down team basically ever, if you consider how often they went on fourth down and how efficient they were on fourth down. There's no way that is going to continue. But I think you balance that out by adding Laramie Tunsil and adding Deebo Samuel and maybe Josh Connerly if he starts. And so the offensive line will protect Daniels better, and they'll have the Samuel and better receivers. And so I think that's where the feeling is that this offense can still be near the top of the league.
Yeah, and I think schematically, they are doing good things that have been able to cover up some of the issues that they had last year. And I think looking at what Cliff Kingsbury did last year I think it's a lot different than what he was doing in Arizona. They were still using a lot of pace, and that was kind of their main thing. But the way this offense kind of opened up week by week, there was a very clear set plan of how they allowed Jaden Daniels to develop. So I think it is going to be more open this week. 18 and the playoff offense looks so much different than it did in week 1. There was much more on the plate. There was a bigger menu available to them. So I think there is going to now be more just in general, even if things didn't change. But the fact that they did upgrade the offensive line a little bit, I do have a thing in the book where I'm a little more optimistic now about what Deebo Samuel can be than I probably was at the time of the trade, just kind of looking back on what he was doing before he got pneumonia, which I think is a thing that was looked over a lot during the season.
Yes.
And pneumonia and Brandon Ayuk getting hurt kind of happened at the same time. And before that, he was playing pretty well. So I think there is a little bit where he's not going to have to be that number one option either. And I think Jaden Daniels, I think there are some things as a passer, just kind of watching him, I think there are more things he's going to be able to do in year 2 that wasn't really on the table for him in year 1. So if you have some progression there in the passing development, especially on early downs, you're probably going to regress some of the scrambling, because I think it was one of the best scrambling seasons ever. You're not going to get as much value there, but I think you might be able to counteract that a little bit. This still remains a fairly good offense. Even if there is some regression in some of the things they did so well, I think they are going to get a little better. Some of the things that were issues last year.
McLaurin, of course, right now is still in a contract haggle. The Commanders now operate on 49ers time, which means like August 30th, maybe they'll finally say, oh, we give up and give him some money. By the way, we're talking about this division title projection. Commanders are plus 220 to win the NFC East. Plus 220.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good. Even if I were to subjectively change the ratings, I would lower Washington a little bit so that the Eagles were slightly better team. But given the schedules, I think that they have an even chance to win the division. And I like Washington at plus 220 is a good bet, I think. Let's talk about, before we talk about the Dallas Cowboys, just a reminder, if you're watching us live, you can make comments and ask questions. And again, we're going to give a copy of football, FTN Football Almanac 2025 to somebody who comments with their pick of which team we think has the highest win projection this year. It's not an NFC East team, but that gives you the other 28 teams to play with. And don't forget, if you pre-order the Almanac right now at ftnfantasy.com/almanac, you get $5 off the final price that we have on Monday. And the sample chapter is now available. So you can now read about San Francisco 49ers, a team that our numbers love for this year. That is the sample chapter, ftnfantasy.com/almanac. Super Glucose wants to know, is this the sicko prediction of the Cowboys missing the playoffs?
Oh, missing. They're plus 180.
I don't feel like that Cowboys missing the playoffs is that sicko a prediction. Let's talk about, my worry about the Cowboys projections is that we have them too low, given that Dak Prescott was an MVP candidate 2 years ago. But at the same time, you look at this team and you're like, I don't know who the cornerbacks really are, if they're healthy, and Brian Schottenheimer is nobody's choice for a head coach. And I mean, yes, Pickkins and Lamb should be a great wide receiver team, and there should be a good offensive line, but will Schottenheimer use it all correctly? And so the Cowboys are a mystery to me.
And Dan, you had the misfortune of having to comb through all the former first-round picks and second-round picks that they signed or traded for in the offseason.
Yeah, that seemed to be their strategy of player acquisition. Is we like this guy when he was in the draft, so and he hasn't worked out in the NFL, even though we now have more sample of him in the NFL. But sure, it'll work for us. That seemed to be how they went about player acquisition. But it is interesting because there are some players like that, like a George Pickens, I think does fit well with this offense. And if for the past couple of years, really probably since Amari Cooper left, or maybe the first year of Brandon Cooks, that there hasn't really been a vertical threat that opened up this offense. And when you have a receiver like CeeDee Lamb, who is so good in the middle of the field, that's probably his best role. If you don't have that vertical stretch of the offense, everything is condensed in the middle of the field. So if you're trying to target that, the defense can just sit there. And I think that's really what happened last year. Or when you look at even before Dak got hurt, he wasn't playing well because so many things were forced. And Dak Prescott is one of these quarterbacks who is going to try to test a tight window, especially with the amount of seam balls he likes to throw. But this was kind of abnormally tight windows he was throwing into last year, just because there was no space in this offense. So how good this offense can be, I think, does sit on how well Pickens does go into this offense and how well this is structurally placed with Broughton Schottenheimer, who again was the offensive coordinator of the offense that did not really create a lot of space last year.
I like, by the way, when you talked about all of these guys, of course, Pickens is the anomaly where he's a star and they brought him in, because it's the rest of it's a Kenneth Murray and a Peyton Turner and a Khair Ilum and all these other guys. Like you said, we know that they love them because the Cowboys are so transparent that they were like hyping them up on their team website before the draft. And then when they didn't get them, it's just like, 3 years later, we're going to bring these guys back.
Yeah, that just kind of seems to be how they have gone about their player acquisition for a little bit. They're not a team that's going to spend a whole lot in free agency. They will tell you that. They will also tell you it's because their star players do need new contracts, even though that could be avoided by signing them 2 years earlier, like every other team in the league does. And we're still waiting on a Micah Parsons, the contract that probably should have been done. Oh, it absolutely should have been done already, but we're going to wait as long as possible there. And that's probably going to be, the $40 million deal, or over 40 now because of the Myles Garrett deal. So it's just the Cowboys, I think, just aren't really optimizing how they are gaining players. And I think that is kind of how we view this team, where it's okay, but it definitely could be better. And it's by their own design that they're not getting better in that way.
By the way, I
interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
I Googled briefly to see if there was any Micah Parsons news. I Googled Dallas Cowboys. All the news was about cheerleaders. All news was about their cheerleaders.
Maybe the cheerleaders are getting a new contract.
Well, there was a photo shoot, folks. You feel free to check it out. Okay. But this is not 1977. The Cowboys cheerleaders should not be making all their news. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Aaron.
I was going to say, this is an interesting team because the offense, the running game, I think is a really good test of whether running backs matter again.
Yeah.
Like I've heard people talk about, well, they have some running backs this year. Not really. I mean, it's a good offensive line. Yeah. Javonte Williams hasn't been good since he was injured.
Yeah.
Miles Sanders hasn't been much the last couple of years. And people are like, oh, they're excited about Jaden Blue. Jaden Blue is a 5th round pick.
Mm-hmm.
So either it's exciting, he's exciting, which shows you the kind of running backs you can get in the 5th round, or it's a 5th round running back, don't get excited. Like, I don't know if this team's going to have much of a running game.
Deuce Vaughn says hi, by the way. We talk about rookie running backs. Deuce Vaughn says hello to everyone.
Oh, yeah. Never really happened for him, did it?
Right.
Yeah, and this is a test of the offensive line, too, where this is, Dallas has been known for the offensive line for a long time. And as those players started to cycle out, this is the one place they have really invested in trying to keep that offensive line going.
Yeah, including this year's 1st round pick. Yeah.
It's been hit or miss a little bit. So this is not exactly the dominant offensive line that they've had, but there has been a lot of early draft picks coming into this line. So if that is something that can click, probably does help the passing game, will definitely help the running game, but that is needing a little bit more development than what they've gotten from some of their guys on that line.
Plus 180 to make the playoffs.
If you want to go that way, I mean, they're just a mystery to me.
They're high volatility.
Yeah. Let's talk about the New York Giants. There is a world, Nina Kimes keeps talking about this on her show. There is a world in which this defensive line is so unstoppable that the Giants have a top 10 defense this year.
Mm-hmm.
I still have a hard time seeing a world in which that is joined with a good offense, unless Jackson Dart turns out to be much better than people think he should be as a rookie, which is a possibility given rookie quarterbacks. You know, you can't count on them to be good, but some of them do turn out to be. I just don't think that's likely, and he's not going to start right away anyway, probably. But this defense is interesting because there's questions in the back end, but there's Javon Holland now, and there's Paulson Adebo, who was like the most targeted cornerback in the league last year.
Right.
People seem to feel is reasonable. And then that defensive line, if they kick one of those guys inside, you have Dexter Lawrence, Thibodeau, Burns, and Abdul Carter all on the field at the same time. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, and I think that's probably, if they can create enough chaos there, that's what you're hoping for. I do still have some hesitations in the secondary because, yeah, sure, you have Javon Holland now, but you also had Xavier McKinney, 2 years ago, and it was still not a good passing defense. Yeah, I think when you look at, you're really hoping Deonte Banks is something, which he has not been. So you're hoping for development there. I'm not super high on Paulson Adebo, so I do think there are some questions in how well the secondary is going to hold up, even if the pressure is getting there. I think that the pressure is going to happen, but if that matters, if everyone else is wide open, the ball is going to get out in 2.5 seconds. I'm not sure, how much pressure is really going to be impactful in the way they're hoping, because I think there are still a lot of questions.
Yeah, you have to have Deonte Banks really develop and play better than he has. And I think people like Drew Phillips as the slot guy.
Yeah.
He was good last year, but yeah, with Adebo, who was super duper targeted in the 7 games that he played. So yeah,
it's weird min-maxing to have that much pass rush, and Thibodeau, who I'm guessing his trade value isn't high because he's not always 100% with the program, and not go out there and say, well, maybe we should try to improve something elsewhere along the line, because you're going to be in this situation where, yeah, you got 5 sacks in this game, but you lost because the other team only needed 20 points. You don't have enough on offense, and there's enough big plays you'll be able to get on that secondary that you're going to win games anyhow.
Yeah. Super Glucose says, if I had a nickel for every time a New York team said, let's get a cast-off Steelers quarterback, I would have 2 nickels, which is not a lot, but it's still weird that it happened twice. We'll get to Justin Fields in a couple of weeks, but yeah, I mean, I think obviously Malik Neighbors is a freaking stud, but the rest of this offense, Theo Johnson is fine. Tracy I'm not that excited about. I think he's fine. I think, Slayton, I've always felt is underrated in that he's fine.
Yeah.
And the quarterbacks are, at least you've got 2 guys who can go deep with Neighbors and Slayton, and Wilson is a guy who can get the ball deep, but how long can he stay upright with that offensive line other than Andrew Thomas?
Yeah, I think that's going to be what this offense relies on. I think it's going to look a lot like probably the Steelers offense when it was with Russell Wilson, where it's going to be catch the ball and a go route. And if the go route hits, we're going to be looking good. And that's going to be a very high big play rate. When it doesn't, it's going to be a very low success rate. So I think like that is going to be the type of offense that we have right now. A guy like Darius Slayton is probably still underrated because he is that vertical threat on a team that had a quarterback for the past 6 years that just refused to throw deep unless someone was wide open by 15 yards. So I think there is maybe some ability there with Wilson, who is certainly going to be willing to throw deep. I kind of wanted a little more from Darius Slayton during free agency than to come back to the Giants. After he spent like the past 4 years, the Giants being like, we don't really want you. We'll try to trade you. And then suddenly he's always the number 1 receiver.
Brian Finneran used to have these efficient seasons for Atlanta every year. And every offseason, the Falcons tried to replace him. And every offseason, it didn't work. And Finneran was back.
Yeah.
And having a reasonably efficient season. And the Darius Slayton is the modern Brian Finneran.
Yeah, but the market's talking to us a little bit when he never seems to get that other contract.
Yeah.
Maybe if Trent Baalke was still high, he'd be in Jacksonville, but it didn't happen.
I will say it's funny when I did the like in and out for every team in preparation for the show.
Yeah.
There's very little out for the Giants.
Right. Who wants them?
Azeez Ojulari and Adoree Jackson are in Philadelphia now, I guess. And then that's it. Like that's the out.
Darren Waller is now in Miami.
Yeah, well, Darren Waller wasn't around last year.
He wasn't around. He was already out.
I mean, listen, there's a way you can tell a story where the Giants, where Dart is Russell Wilson and he's better than anybody thought and he wins the job from the get-go and he plays well and that defensive line scares everybody. And oh my God, the Giants like last year I was saying the Giants were the worst team in football because they had no hope.
Right.
The Giants definitely have hope this year. Now it's New Orleans that's the team with no hope. But I don't think it's likely.
Here, but we're looking at the wrong end. The over-under is down at 5.5. 5.5 wins you can get at plus over 5.5 wins you can get at plus 125 for the Giants, and we're talking about a team that could get 60 sacks with that defensive line.
That schedule is super hard.
Schedule is super hard, but if they can get to 6-11, you get a win. I don't think that's crazy to say.
I don't think it's crazy. At plus 125, it definitely might be reasonable.
Yeah.
Dark Phoenix says, I like how the Giants are starting kind of to head in the right direction. I think Russell Wilson is just temporary to find a good rebuild point. I think everybody feels that way. I mean, Jackson Dart is their quarterback of the future. You take a quarterback in the first round, he's your guy.
Brian Dable will be fired in November. They're not going in the right direction. They're going sideways.
I mean, the way the schedule starts, he very much may be fired in October or something.
He could be October. I hate to be Wolverine to Dark Phoenix here and snick some bad news into you, but they're not going in the right direction. They drafted a hell of a ball player this year and a hell of a ball player last year. That they did.
Yeah. All right. That does it for today's show previewing the NFC East. Again, thank you everybody for coming back with us. Now, if you are listening as a podcast after the way, go to the YouTube page for the show and leave a comment. If you predict which team we had with the most win projection in this year's book, you will win a free copy of this year's book. So please go to the YouTube page and make that guess. We will be back next week, same time, 11 a.m. Eastern. We are doing the NFC North next week. And I believe we're going to have two guests, if I figure out how to filter them in one at a time. Aaron Nagler, who is a Packers guy, and Drew McGarry from The Defector, who is a Vikings fan and takes issue with our Vikings projections.
Oh, God. Thanks for giving me a warning.
This should be fun, but that is next week. Thank you to Dan for joining us. Dan's chapters in the book are great. Always follow him on Blue Sky and X or Twitter or whatever we're still calling it. Don't forget about Mike's Two Deep Zone Substack at miketanier.substack.com. And again, ftnfantasy.com/almanac. Buy a pre-order before Monday to save $5. And of course, if you want to double up, look on FTN Fantasy also for the Jeff Radcliffe Fantasy Guide with Malik Neighbors on the cover for all your fantasy football needs, past all the projections that we have in the Almanac. We have projections in the Almanac too, but Jeff goes more into fantasy football focus when we talk about the Fantasy Guide. All right, I'm Aaron Schatz. That does it for today's show. We will see you next week. So long, everybody.